Number 10. Operation Northwoods, a conspiracy theory that was actually real paperwork. Back in the early 1960s, U.S. military officials wrote a strange proposal. The goal was to create support for attacking Cuba, and their idea was unusual. They suggested staging fake incidents. Things like fake hijackings were discussed. Yes, actual fake disasters. The logic was simple. Scare the public and they might support war. Today this would sound like a wild internet theory. The kind people argue about at 2 a.m., but decades later the documents were declassified, and historians went, wait, this was real. The proposal had signatures and planning details. So it wasn't just someone's weird notebook idea. But here's the important twist. President John F. Kennedy rejected it. So the plan never happened. It stayed locked in government files. Years later, when people read it, many realized some crazy conspiracies started as real proposals. Number 9. Project MKUltra, a real experiment that sounds like a sci-fi movie. During the Cold War, the CIA became obsessed with one question: can the human mind be controlled? So they launched a secret research program. Very secret, like don't tell literally anyone. Secret scientists tested strange methods. Drugs, hypnosis, and psychological tricks. One chemical became especially famous. LSD entered the chat. Some experiments happened in laboratories. Others happened without people even knowing. Yes, some subjects were not told anything. Ethics committees today would faint instantly. Researchers wanted to see if minds could be influenced or even broken and rebuilt. For years the program stayed hidden, locked behind classified files. Then investigations in the 1970s exposed it. Journalists and government hearings started asking questions. Many documents had already been destroyed, which honestly made the story even more suspicious. The surviving records confirmed the program existed. So this was not just a late-night conspiracy theory. MKUltra became one of the strangest Cold War projects, proof that reality is sometimes weirder than fiction. Number 8. Project Sunshine, a bright name for a surprisingly dark research story. In the 1950s, scientists had a strange question: how much nuclear fallout was entering the human body? Testing radiation directly wasn't easy. So researchers looked for a clue inside bones. They focused on a substance called strontium-90, a radioactive particle created by nuclear bomb tests. Here's the creepy science part. Your body can store it in bones like calcium. So scientists began collecting human bone samples. Yes, that sentence already feels a little uncomfortable. Many samples came from autopsies around the world, including remains from children. The goal was to measure global nuclear fallout, basically tracking how far bomb tests were spreading radiation. The data actually helped scientists warn governments. Fallout was traveling much farther than expected, which later pushed pressure to limit nuclear testing. Science accidentally became political, but the project was extremely secret at the time. Families often had no idea samples were taken. When the story became public years later, people were understandably disturbed because Project Sunshine proved something strange. Sometimes history's weirdest stories are completely real. Number 7. Operation Paperclip, one of the strangest recruiting programs in history. Right after World War II ended, the United States started looking for scientists, not just any scientists, German scientists who had worked for Nazi Germany. Yes, the same people who built advanced rockets. History sometimes has very awkward job interviews. The U.S. government wanted their knowledge, especially for rockets, weapons, and future technology, so hundreds of them were secretly brought to America. Paperclips were used to attach new identities to their files. That little office trick actually inspired the name, not the most dramatic code name ever. Some of these scientists later worked on the space program, including projects that helped reach the moon One famous example was Wernher von Braun, a rocket engineer who later helped NASA build the Saturn V. So the Cold War turned former enemies into co-workers. Imagine that group chat. The program stayed quiet for years. Governments tend to do that with controversial plans. When documents later became public, people realized how complicated the story really was. Operation Paperclip showed a strange reality. History is rarely simple and often very uncomfortable. Number 6. COINTELPRO was a secret program by the FBI, and yeah, it was very secret. It began in 1956, right in the middle of the Cold War. The goal was simple on paper. Watch groups seen as dangerous. At first, it targeted communist groups. Then the list kept growing. Activists and protest groups were included, even loudspeakers with big opinions. Agents used wiretaps and informants. Classic spy stuff. They also spread rumors. Office drama, but government edition. Fake letters were sometimes sent. Nothing suspicious at all. Right one focus was the Black Panther Party. Officials feared their influence. Leaders were watched closely, including Martin Luther King Jr. The program stayed hidden for years, very hidden. Then documents were exposed in 1971, and people were seriously shocked. Number 5. Project SHAD was a military experiment, and yes, it already sounds suspicious. It happened during the Cold War around the 1960s. The program was run by the United States Department of Defense. They wanted to test chemical and biological warfare defenses. But instead of labs, they sometimes used real ships and soldiers. Troops were often told very little. Surprise science is apparently a strategy. Researchers released test substances, sometimes bacteria, sometimes chemicals. The idea was to see how materials spread, wind, water, ventilation, all that stuff. Some tests happened at sea, ships quietly sailing through experimental clouds. Many soldiers didn't know what they were part of, which is not the best workplace communication. Decades later, the details started surfacing. People had a lot of questions. Investigations were launched. Records were slowly uncovered. Project SHAD became another strange Cold War story. Real history can be weirder than conspiracy videos. Number 4. Operation Mockingbird was a secret media project. It involved the CIA during the Cold War. The idea started in the late 1940s, right when paranoia was basically a global hobby. Officials worried about Soviet influence, so they looked at newspapers and radio. Some journalists secretly cooperated. Others probably had no clue. Information could be shaped or guided. Like editing reality's headline, stories might be promoted or buried. News, but with backstage controls, certain reporters allegedly received briefings. Imagine getting government tips before breakfast. Major media outlets were rumored to be connected. Not exactly a public relations dream. Supporters said it protected national security. Critics said it crossed a big line. In the 1970s, investigators started digging. Suddenly, the story became news itself. Congressional hearings exposed many secrets. Awkward silence filled a room. Operation Mockingbird became a famous controversy. Turns out media history has plot twists. Number 3. The Tuskegee Syphilis study started in 1932. It took place in Tuskegee, Alabama. The project was run by the U.S. Public Health Service. They said it was about medical research. Hundreds of poor African American men were recruited. Most were told they were getting free health care. Doctors wanted to observe syphilis over time, so they mostly watched and took notes. Here's the uncomfortable part. Many participants were never properly informed. Even when treatments later existed, the study kept going anyway. Penicillin became common in the 1940s. But the experiment didn't suddenly stop. Some researchers wanted long-term data. Science curiosity taken way too far. The study quietly continued for decades. Yes, decades. In 1972, a whistleblower spoke to the press. Suddenly, the whole country was like, wait, what? Public outrage exploded pretty fast. Investigations followed soon after. The study finally ended and reforms were created. Modern research rules got much stricter after that. Number 2, PRISM was a secret surveillance program. It quietly lived inside the Internet age. The program was run by the National Security Agency. Yeah, the agency famous for listening skills. PRISM reportedly started around 2007. Right when smartphones were taking over pockets. The system collected digital communications, emails, chats, videos, and stored files. It worked through data requests to big tech companies. Think giant servers instead of spy gadgets. Companies like Google and Facebook were mentioned in reports. The Internet suddenly felt less private. Officials said it targeted foreign intelligence threats. Supporters called it necessary for security. Critics worried about mass surveillance. Because nobody likes feeling watched online, the program stayed mostly secret for years. Then 2013 changed everything. A contractor named Edward Snowden leaked documents. Suddenly, PRISM was world news. Governments defended the program publicly. Privacy debates exploded across the internet. PRISM became one of the biggest surveillance stories ever. Turns out the cloud had a few shadows. Number 1, ECHELON was rumored to be a giant global listening system. Basically, the world's biggest pair of headphones. It reportedly started during the Cold War years. Back when paranoia was basically a hobby, several countries were set to work together on it. Think intelligence agencies forming a secret group chat. The alliance supposedly included the United States and the United Kingdom. Also Canada, Australia, and New Zealand joined the club. Their partnership is often called the Five Eyes Alliance. Yes, that already sounds like a spy movie. ECHELON focused on intercepting communications worldwide. Phone calls, satellite signals, radio transmissions, you name it. Huge listening stations were built in remote places. Big dishes pointed at the sky like alien hunters. The system reportedly scanned messages for keywords, kind of like spam filters, but way more serious. For years, people debated whether ECHELON was real. Governments were not exactly eager to explain. Reports in the late 1990s pushed the story into public debate. Suddenly, journalists were very interested in satellites. ECHELON became one of the earliest global surveillance controversies. Turns out even the sky might have ears.